It's the 6th already. Look at that. We have a special guest I want to get to right away. It's Professor Richard Wolff is with us. He's the host of the YouTube economic update show, Democracy at Work. He's the author of many books, including the most recent book, The System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. That book has a very handsome blurb in it from yours truly. Please welcome back to the show, Professor Richard Wolff.
Glad to be here, Jimmy.
So I wanted you to, so you consider yourself a Marxist economist, and so I wanted to show you stuff. I keep seeing stuff like this, and I wanted you to explain what are people, so here's a tweet. It said, we're in big trouble if these Marxist psychopaths don't go to prison. There's Justin Trudeau, Bill Gates, and then Barack Obama. And then here's one more I'll show you. Make no mistake, these Hamas encampments are Marxist at their core. The same cast of characters as the BLM riots in 2020, except now they wear, how do you say that? Instead of N95 masks. Both have the same goal, though, to abolish Western liberties, values, and capitalism. Now, I always thought that Marxism was just about workers owning it was a critique of capitalism, and it was about workers owning the means of production. What do you think people think it means when you see them tweet out a picture of those three guys and say that Marxist is Hamas? What are they getting wrong?
What they're getting wrong, which I kind of understand, is the fruit of the last 75 years of American history. After World War II, and let's remember, during World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies in the war against Germany, Italy, and Japan. You know, it was difficult. In the immediate aftermath of that, everybody had to change uniform. The ally became the enemy, and the enemy became the ally. It was very confusing. And in the course of the last 75 years, the bad guys, the Soviet Union, socialists, Marxists, communists, all those kinds of words, became the sum total of horrible, evil, and bad. It's kind of embarrassing. In most other countries, Marxism is an understood point of view. There are magazines and parties and unions and all kinds of people with the label until the population learns what it means, but not here in the United States. I'll give you an example. I'm the product of elite education in this country. I went to Harvard, Stanford, and Yale. Those are the only schools I went to. Nobody taught us about Marxism at all. The occasional comments were dismissive. This is silly. So that nobody learned what it was. And so it became one of those words you could attach to anything that was bad. So you don't like something, you call it devilish, you call it evil, you call it awful, and then you add a few new words: Marxist, socialist, communist. Since most Americans didn't know mostly what that was all about, nobody had a big rule saying, well, that's a silly thing. And then you get the kind of picture you just showed. Justin Trudeau is a politician as far from Marxist as you can get. Bill Gates, I'd be surprised if he can spell Marxist. And Barack Obama, come on. No one should in a serious way do this. It's only in a peculiar part of the country where people really still get off on throwing that label around. It's embarrassing because it shows that you don't know what that tradition is all about, and you're just using it in a way that shows that you're kind of ignorant about it. I don't want to call folks names, but this is not serious. Marxism is a serious set of ideas. You don't have to agree with it. I find some of it interesting, others part I don't, but I'm not going to run away from having learned about it because that just shows I'm ignorant or scared or both.
So how would you, in the briefest way possible, what would you define what a Marxist actually is? Because those three guys, so those two guys are just puppets of capitalists, and the other guy is a monopolist, capitalist, authoritarian. So what would you say? Is Marxism authoritarianism?
No, Jimmy, I would start off with your definition. It's fine. It's a critique of capitalism. Let's go back to Karl Marx. By the way, his birthday was May 5th, so we're pretty close. Let's go back to Marx and say what he said. He said, look, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, the great economists of the world, have been people who love capitalism, and that's fine. And they make a certain sense out of it, which is a sense of somebody who loves what they're thinking about and what they're trying to understand. And he said the only difference between them and me is I'm a critic. I think the human race can do better than capitalism, so I approach it from a critical perspective. And that's what Marxism has mostly been. That's certainly what I've learned from it. That's why I found it interesting. I needed to balance the cheerleading for capitalism, which is what passes in our universities as science. I needed to balance that with a critical approach. And that's what Karl Marx and the Marxists do. They give you a critical approach. And you know something? If you're a normally intelligent person, you kind of listen to the people who like it. Listen to them by all means. Then listen to the people who criticize it, and then make your own judgment. That'd be kind of a reasonable way to go. But if you're living in a country that's afraid of its own people, well, then you only give them a steady diet of the celebration and you demonize the critics. I hope we're outgrowing that in this country, because certainly that's long overdue.
So people are in. So when I see people equate authoritarianism with Marxism, I think they get it confused. And because communism, it turned in again in its pure form is not that, but it played out that way in Russia, that it became authoritarianism. Certainly, it is in China. Yes. But Marxism isn't that. Marxism is Marxism is not anti-capitalism either, in a sense, right? But Marxism is for the buying and selling of things.
No, Marxism is anti-capitalism, but Marxism is not authoritarianism. You're right that people have taken it and used it in that direction. But come on, if you look at the history of Christianity, I'll pick an example, you can see lots of people who took one form or another of Christianity and used it in an authoritarian way in their church, in their community, in the country, in the whole world. And we've had lots of history that shows us all of that. And if you're going to say Marxists have also experienced the use of their ways of thinking and their ideas to support authoritarianism of one kind or another, yeah, absolutely. And that has been an argument and a fight inside of Marxism. You don't need to go to the enemies of Marxism to find a critique of authoritarian. Within Marxism, that argument has been made over and over again, and anyone with a passing knowledge of that tradition would know that there have been authoritarian tendencies and anti-authoritarian tendencies, just like those have existed in Christianity, Islam, or any other major global way of thinking.
So Marxism is you say it's anti-capitalism, but yeah, it's for the buying and selling. It's for manufacturing things and selling them, right?
Let me explain. It's mostly about how you organize production. It's not so much about how you organize distribution. Buying and selling is how we move things from where they were produced to where they're going to be consumed. That's what we have a market to do, right? A market, people come who have something to sell because it's been produced, and they exchange it for money with the buyer, etc. Marxism is not that interested in that. Marx was critical of starting your understanding of economics by looking at exchange or markets. He wanted to get people to look elsewhere. Where? To production. And here comes the punchline. The way capitalism organizes production is with a small group of people at the top whom we call employers, and a vast army of people underneath them that we call employees. And Marx said that's not the only or the necessary way to organize production. I think I have a better way. And that was his critique. We can do better than capitalism. And what was his idea? That you make the workplace a community, a democratic community. One person, one vote. Together we produce, dividing the labor up amongst ourselves, acknowledging that some people have more skills in this area or aptitude in that one. But we do it as a community, not as a group of people at the top who, by the way, are authoritarian inside the enterprise, and he was against that. He wanted a democratic arrangement of the kind we can find here in the United States throughout our history under the name worker co-op. It's just another way of thinking. That's what Marx's basic idea was. And it was an idea that said, look, in the old days of slavery, we had masters and slaves. And the human race got beyond that. And in the days of feudalism after slavery, we had lords and serfs, and we got beyond that. Nowadays in capitalism, we have something that ought to scare us. Once again, a small group of people at the top. They're not masters, they're not lords, but they're employers, and they preside over a vast group of people who have many fewer rights and privileges and end up coming up on the short end of the stick. Those we call employees. We can do better than any. And just as we fought our way out of slavery and feudalism, it will come sooner or later that the employees will get up and say, we've had enough of this. We're going to run our own enterprises in a democratic, one person, one vote way. We don't need to have new masters, new lords called employers. We can do better than that. That's Marx's idea.
So
that's his basic push.
So I have been to worker co-ops. One that springs to mind. I was in Boise, Idaho. I went to a grocery store. It was a workers co-op. It looked like capitalism to me. It looked like all the stuff that is made by General Mills and all the stuff, Kellogg's and all kind of stuff was there. And then I took the money I have and I took it to a cash register and they sold it to me. So
absolutely, that part is the same. But here's the different part. When they sat down after the door was closed at 6 o'clock on a weekday, when they sat down, they had their meeting. Guess what? All the workers together democratically decided, among other things, who gets paid how much money. And guess what? They never gave 3 or 4 people an enormous amount of money so they could have a yacht and a mansion, and everybody else is wondering how to pay for their kids' college or how to put food on the table. They wouldn't do that because in a community of people, everybody with one vote, that's not what happens. That's where the difference comes. They run the business in a radically different way. But in the end, they want to give you your stalk of celery and get your money because they have to manage the business. But how they do it, what kind of community you have, how they relate to one another, that's what's different, and that's what's better than capitalism, at least from Marx's point of view.
And so I think a lot of people like me, this is a small business I started, right?
Right.
And so I needed an editor, I needed an assistant, so what if they got together and they decided they wanted to fire me? Now is that what Marxism means? That they could get together and take over the company and get rid of me?
No, but it does mean that you would have to give them a roughly equal position in your business at some point. Doesn't have to be right away. Worker co-ops have developed a whole rich range of options. For example, if you start the business, that will give you, the worker co-op can decide, a certain importance, a certain power, a certain share of the output. All kinds of things have been arranged like that. You can have a trial period to see whether new people coming in understand and accept what it means to be part of a democratic community. Look, when we first got beyond, we're giving everybody the vote. The first thing you heard was, well, some people are smart and they pay attention to what's going on. They're going to have the vote. And then all the stupid people who don't give a crap, they're not going to have a vote. And this can never work. Guess what? It worked. There are a lot of arguments about this. I'm a professor of economics, spent all my life studying this stuff. I haven't the slightest doubt that working people are just as smart as those folks at the top. They can figure out, give a job to a person who loves that kind of work, who's good at it, who spent some time learning it. If you want more people doing that kind of thing and they have to have an education, offer them some more money. All of that can be done, and worker co-ops do all of that. But what they have is a basic commitment. We don't allow the division of a core, a small core, that board of directors, those 10 or 20 folks at the top, who most of us don't even know, to have all the power to hire, to fire. No, 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 no. The firing you asked about. Firing becomes a very important decision that has to be made by everybody together. No one person has in their hands the power to fire 10 other people at their whim. And that's been a bone of contention in capitalism to this day.
So that the irony is that, as the way I see it, is that when people call Marxist authoritarian, it's the exact opposite. Capitalism is actually authoritarian. You have a boss who decides for everything and everybody, and what you get paid, and when you come to work, and when you go home, and where you work. For instance, the boss decides, I want to move my company to Mexico, and he gets to do that at the snap of a finger. So to me, that's the irony. People who say Marxists, they equate it with authoritarianism. It's exactly the opposite, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me speak personally. I'm a critic of authoritarianism. I've hated it all my life. I don't want other people telling me what to do unless I'm part of a community where we together can decide. I have my vote. I can live with. I don't want. I found my way to Marxism because I was anti-authoritarian. That's why, for me, Marxism was a very interesting set of ideas about how we can get the economy, the production of goods and services we all depend on, to be organized in a non-authoritarian way.
Right.
When I teach my students, I say what you say. You walk into a workplace, a factory, an office, a store, and you're walking into an authoritarian arrangement in which a very few people at the top can not only tell you where to stand and how to work and with what tool and for how long and when you can go to the toilet and all the rest, but can literally take the job away from you, depriving you, your family, your community of why are we allowing? Let me end with this. The U.S. Census counts people as employers or employees. You know what percent of our population in America is employers? 3%. The rest of us, this is not a system of equals and of democracy. This is an authoritarian system. Marxism is the critique of that, and it ought to interest people that are anti-authoritarianism because they'll find useful insights there.
Do you think a lot of people, because whenever I hear the argument, when I find most people don't know what any of the words mean in the first place, but a lot of it has to do with, like, let's say I have my own show, the Jimmy Dore Show. I would want to be the dictator of what happens in the end and not, I would take into account stuff.
Right.
But this is a small thing. I don't think people are like cognizant of the fact that all these companies are now bigger than countries. So now when a thing's that size, you don't have no constitution in it.
Right.
And there's no one to check them, because they check your goddamn government now.
Yes.
And
That's
so
right.
Why shouldn't the smartest people, what he just said is right. You know a lot of smart people that could do, well, we don't want them. We want suck-ups for the pyramid. We want suck-ups.
Yeah.
I don't want you because you're smart.
Yeah.
And that's a criticism of communism you always hear. We got the same goddamn thing. It always becomes the same thing.
Yeah, capitalism and communism. Look at we make the point with the airline travel. There's only 2 companies in the whole goddamn world that make airplanes now, and one of them's completely corrupted. And
China's is better.
And so communism and capitalism seem to get to the same place. I know your time is short, so I just wanted to say, great job. You got the vaccine mandate thing right. I hope people give you the props that you deserve. Now everybody's starting to realize that was all based on a lie. The lie was that the vaccine stopped transmission and contraction of the virus and would get us out of the pandemic. And that was always a lie. It was always a lie. You were right about it, and you came at it from the right angle.
Really?
You don't want to give it. You don't want to give more power to your employer. And my question to you: where were the unions? At that time, why didn't the union stand up for workers? The nurses union didn't stand up for nurses. Nobody stood up for workers. Nobody. I had Cornel West on my show. He couldn't give a shit. It was like water off a duck's ass to him. He couldn't care less that workers had to be mandated to take vaccines. And then got fired for it. So nobody stood up. The people, and I bring up Cornel because you expect him to stand up. His whole thing is I stand up with the oppressed and workers. And when the time came, he turned a blind eye to it, and everybody like him did too, except you. and me. And so I want to say congratulations. Why do you think the unions abandoned their own people over that?
Look, the unions in this country have been on a decline for 70 years. If you look at the statistic, it's a line that goes down in one direction. Once upon a time, we had 35% of the labor force in this country member of unions. Today, it's in the neighborhood of 10, 11% that are in unions. It's been a decline. The unions have been fighting a losing battle to survive. And so when they have been confronted with major issues, they have not been able to do very much. It's not just the whole question of the vaccine during the pandemic. Look, for the last 30 years, we've had a massive exodus of businesses from this country moving their production lines to Brazil or China or India or wherever they've gone, taking away the good jobs, taking away all of the supports that created an American middle class. The unions could have and should have been working hard again, but they couldn't. They were barely able to keep their heads above water. And they've had many other kinds of issues like that. I don't want to make an excuse for them, but I do want to understand that they needed what they're now doing, which is understanding they've got to start all over. They've got to build a labor movement, and they're doing it. That's what's happening at Starbucks. That's what's happening at Amazon. We're seeing it all across the countries. We're seeing it in the colleges and universities. We're on the biggest upsurge of labor, and I think you're going to see in the months and years ahead that the unions will take strong positions on all kinds of important issues for the public. They've kind of learned their lesson that when they grew in the 1930s, they also grew in a way that could be undone afterwards by a business assault that was very successful. And they've learned that lesson. I really do think so. And we're now seeing unions. Look what Shawn Fain and the UAW were able to do in Chattanooga, Tennessee a few weeks ago, breaking into the South, mobilizing, winning an effort at the VW plant there with a 70+% vote of the workers to do what they had to do to get the strikes and the union settlements. So I think we're kind of a turning point in the labor movement, and we're watching the kind of development that will not allow unions to listen to the arguments. Look, unions know from a long time that the pharmaceutical industry in the United States is one of the most monopolized in our country. We really have a medical industrial complex just as powerful in its way as the military industrial complex that you and others have talked about. And we have to face that they are able and willing to do extraordinary things, and that one of the things we owe ourselves is never to take them at their word, never to believe the scientific world that they put together, because we know that they buy and sell research and get it published in the scientific journals. We know how dangerous it is. And I think the unions will be a very important force to raise the kind of questions they were not able in their final downturn days to do when the pandemic hit.
Don't you think it's time for someone like Shawn Fain to start their own political party? They endorsed Joe Biden, and Joe Biden crushed the railroad workers union just a few months earlier than that. So don't you think it's time for that to happen and stop endorsing Democrats and Republicans?
I think it is happening. Look, I felt that way about Bernie. I was sad that he came in and endorsed Biden, let alone as early as he did. And I understand what you're saying about Shawn Fain. They don't think the time is yet ready. I suspect they're a lot more sympathetic to that idea than they let on. I certainly know large numbers of people in the labor movement who are, and more than ever before in my lifetime, and I was born and raised in America and have lived here all my life, I've never seen this proportion of the labor movement thinking and talking about a third political party breaking from the Democrats as I'm hearing today. And watching what's going on now with the Israel, Palestine, Gaza stuff, that all of that is building more and more and more.
Okay, so I know your time is short, so I want to show you this. I came across this clip, and it's super interesting. So this guy is Jared Bernstein. He is the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, and it's the main agency that advises Biden on economic policy. And I wanted to play this for you and get your take.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, I mean, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do?
Sounds like me.
They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? So they sell bonds, and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing, but there is no question that the government prints money, and then it uses that money to yeah, I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
What is happening?
The whole thing he's confused about, just as I am. And so if we print our own money, why don't we just print $34 trillion and pay off our debt right now? Why do we have to borrow money from the Fed? Can you explain that to us as an economics professor?
Absolutely, and it wouldn't take very long, although we may not be able to do it today. First of all, Jared Bernstein, is it embarrassing? Absolutely, you're correct. To have a person in that position unable to answer the question is exposing what is normally very carefully hidden. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the woman asking the key question there is a professor of economics that I know real well. Stephanie Kelton is her name. She was the economic advisor to Bernie Sanders. This is a debate among the people who run the monetary system of the United States. It's very important to understand that throughout history, the people who have been kings, queens, emperors, czars, you name it, have often used the fact that they print the money for their society to do whatever they want. So, for example, if the people don't want to have a war, usually the government has to go to the Congress or the Parliament and get a vote saying, okay, we'll raise the money to let you fight a war. Suppose they won't do it. What does the emperor do? Says, well, I print the money, so I'll make a war by paying for it by printing the money. Is there a limit to that? No. The government has the power to print the money. So they may print it, and if they print a lot of it just to get things done they want, you could flush the economy with money, and you know what you might get if you did that? An inflation, because the money is there being pumped into the economy, and the goods and services that the money will buy are not coming in as fast as the money is, and up go the prices as everybody with money outbids everybody else to get the scarce goods. So over history, we have created institutions that limit the ability of the government just to print the money. And here's what we did in this country. We set up the Federal Reserve, and here's how it works. The government, the president, can't print anything. Only the Federal Reserve can print the money. That's why on your bill it says Federal Reserve note, because they are the ones who do it. And the only way they get to do it is if the government borrows money from the people, issues a bond, a document, an IOU that the government owes the people it borrows from, and then the Federal Reserve has the right to go into the market and buy those bonds from the people who got them by lending to Washington and to the government. And the Federal Reserve has the right to print the money. So again, the money is printed, but not by the government, the president and the Congress, but by a separate entity which is controlled by the banks in this country. And so they have the veto power over how much money the government can issue. That's all this is. It's a fight between the government and the biggest banks in the country, who together have to agree on how much money is going to be pumped in, because they don't trust the president or the monarch to make that decision himself. That's all. The details are not important. That's what we have. And that's how the system has worked.
So you're saying like that latest, say, $100 billion we sent to Ukraine. So the Fed had to print that money. Who tells?
Well, first of all, the government has to borrow it.
Where do they
send the money? Send the money to the Ukraine. The government issues bonds, and it goes out into the market globally. And it says, we, the government of the United States, we're borrowing an extra $61 billion because we want to throw it away in Ukraine. Okay, then around the world, people, banks, companies, whoever wants to, lends the money to the government, U.S., and gets that $61 billion worth of bonds. Then, and this is important to understand, often within minutes, they turn around and sell that U.S. government bond to the Federal Reserve. What does the Federal Reserve pay that money for that? By printing it. So the Federal Reserve prints the money, uses it to buy the bonds that the government sold to finance the war in Ukraine, or to finance giving money to Israel, or whatever else they're doing.
And that's how we get the national debt. So when
that's right, and that keeps accumulating.
So
the only big mistake Jared Bernstein made was to think it didn't matter, because it does. The more the debt of the United States, the more we have to pay taxes to pay the interest to all those people who have that debt. That's still real. And you and I are going to pay more for a beer, or for a rubber tire, or in our income tax, or every other way, because that debt is an asset for the people who lend to the government, and they want to be paid on it, and they're going to make damn sure that they are. And by the way, right now, as we're talking, the debt of the United States is costing in interest almost as much as the entire defense budget of the United States. Don't tell anyone that this isn't important. It's crucial. And with our interest rates staying high and our government borrowing trillions every year, we are in a situation that within a very few years is going to be unsustainable, and nothing is more damning of our system than what I just said is not being discussed, neither by Trump nor by Biden.
We wish we hadn't lost that $2 trillion. That maybe could have chipped away at a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, I know you have to go, so I appreciate your time, and I look forward to talking to you again. Everyone, Professor Richard Wolff, everybody check out his show, Economic Update, Democracy at Work on YouTube. Check out his book, The System of the Sickness. And thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Okay, though. Take care, Jimmy.
Bye-bye.
It sounds like Dumb and Dumber, where they had the IOUs. They got the ransom money, and they're like, we're going to pay every cent back. And they go, no, we got these IOUs. They got orange ski suits.
That was quite a video clip.
It's Wile E. Coyote system.
That's the chief economic advisor to...
Oh, he made chief, did he?
Well,
you'll make chief for this, son.
He is the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors.
What? Bring in my advisors. Advisors, what the hell's happening? Well, it was like a comedy movie. Again, like some guy is disguised as the chairman, and at the last minute got pulled into an interview and has to fake that he's the chairman.
Yeah.
Before getting back to his adventure. We're like, what is the day? He goes, there's no question that we print it, and borrow it. No, I know that was in fact not my question. My question was
my question is why?
No, we know it happens. No, yeah, I know. I'm asking you. Why does it happen?
Why? So why? So
what is a woman? Just throw that in.
Well, my next question would be, well, why don't we just change the system? Because it's called the Fed, so everybody thinks it's part of the government.
It's private.
So, but it's really a private. He's saying the banks run it. This is what he just said.
That's how they can do that scam.
I always thought it was part of the government, but then people told me it was part of the it was private, and then other people go, no, of course it's part of the government. The president appoints the head of the Fed. And I'm like, well, this seems very tricky. Then why doesn't the president, why do we have to fucking, if the Fed is part of the government, then that question is really even more pertinent. Why are we borrowing money? Why doesn't the government just Jimmy, goddamn print it?
Okay, so I knew it was private from before.
Yeah.
When somebody goes, no, it's part of the government. You're wrong, asshole. Look at it. Give it a goog. So, but I just didn't realize until now the importance of that until he was explaining it. It's so we can do that scam. It can't be part of the government because why is the government printing money and then borrowing money? Well, it's going through a private. Yeah. It's a public-private partnership.
Yes.
It's fascist. That's how we do it with fascism. So it has to be private on the books. Or of course, the president appoints the guy. Listen, what do you think? The laws matter? No.
Yeah, that's right.
They're why do you think lawyers are all the leaders? They're not practicing lawyers. They studied law to learn little shitty ways to get around the law and rob you of your money and rights. And so that's why it's set up that way. The scheme can't work unless that's a private thing.
So what I would say is, and okay, why don't we switch it back to the government prints the money so we don't have to fucking borrow it, so we don't have to have a deficit to pay back to other people. That's to me.
Hey, here's something fun. That was private, and Al Qaeda is federally funded. Who would have thunk it?
Here's Alan Greenstein, and he.
Can I win his money?
Or Greenspan.
Win Alan Greenstein's money for Jimmy Kimmel.
The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability of default.
You see that guy's face? Like, what the?
Yeah.
That's the former chairman of the Council of Economic. That's the.
They don't tell them this part?
That he's like, huh?
First I'm hearing of this. It's the first I'm hearing of how the whole shit works.
So here, let's bring in. So let's take a break and we'll bring in Paul.
All right, be back.
Well, let me tell you. Shut it down. If I were Rabbi Shmuley and diddle-diddle-diddle-digga-digga-diddle-diddle-dum, all day long I'd diddle little bums. If I were a Shmuley man, I'd peddle all my dildos, dreidel dildos, selling dildos with my daughter and her mum. If I were a Jewish mooly man, I'd be digging with a dildo in my bum. I'd wear a grotesque nose and go grab some goyim right on the nipple with a pinch. A Shabbos lap dance brace for the youngest mensch.
Hey, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there for more AM Joy and the rest of MSNBC. And click on any of the videos right here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. And you can get more videos from MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit